A linked list is a data structure that consists of structures that are dynamically allocated and are linked together using pointers. A linked list of structures is an alternative to an array of structures when you want to store a database. One reason for that is that with linked lists, everything is dynamically allocated only when you need it. So with an array, you typically set the array size, and sometimes you're stuck with that size, but with a linked list, everything is dynamically allocated. So you have structures that store information and you allocate them when you want to, when you need a structure to store information. So each dynamically allocated structure stores information in its fields. The structures in a linked list are called elements of the linked list. So you have in the linked list, each element, you have data stored. For example, if you're storing information on employees, then you might store their name, their department, their salary, etc., etc. But you also need to have at least one field in each structure that is a pointer to the next element in the linked list. So with dynamic memory allocation, the memory is allocated and a pointer stores the value of the address. And so with linked lists, you have dynamically allocated structures that are linked together using pointers. So there are several pointers that you have in a linked list. You have some kind of a first pointer that points to the first element of the linked list. It points to the beginning of the linked list. Every element has a next pointer that points to the next element in the linked list. You also have a last pointer. You don't have to, but it's very useful to have a last pointer pointing to the last element in the linked list. And since the last element in the linked list isn't pointing to anything, its next pointer typically has some kind of default value, and typically it's called null or nil or something like that. So again, since it doesn't point to anything, that last next pointer has a default value. It's very important with the linked list that you always maintain the integrity of the linked list, which means the first pointer always points to the first element, the last pointer always points to the last element, the last next pointer has a default value, again typically null, and the list is actually linked together by all of the next pointers. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of a linked list. I'm going to have some kind of a first pointer that points to the first element in the linked list, which is a structure that stores information. So for example, if I'm storing information on my employees, I might have their name, I might have their department, I might have some kind of ID number, I might have their salary, etc. So you have all of these fields within the structure that store information on each employee. And then somewhere in there you have a next pointer that points to the next elements, the next structure in the linked list. And again, all of the same fields, name, department, ID, etc. And then the next pointer points to the next element. So you dynamically allocate these. So for example, if you have a file and you're in a while loop that keeps going till you get to the end of the file and you're reading the information from each line in the file into one of these structures, you go back to your file. Is there another line in the file? Okay, then let me dynamically allocate a new structure to store the information from the file, read all the information from the file into the structure, and so forth. So the last next pointer, since it's not pointing at anything, is going to have some default value, for example, null. And we have a last pointer pointing to the end of the linked list. So first points to the beginning, next pointers link the list up, the last next pointer is null, and we have a pointer pointing to the last element in the linked list. So typically, in order to refer to different parts of the linked list, you have to start at the beginning of the linked list. So you start from first and you follow that pointer to one structure. Let's say we want to get to this ID number. So we follow first arrow to the next pointer and then follow its arrow to this. And then, for example, that might be the department field. So you're following the arrows in the linked list to go from each element starting at the beginning of the linked list. Or you can go to the last element by doing last arrow to get to that particular structure.